So today I want to discuss something that almost nobody is talking about, and I think the reason nobody is talking about it is because it requires you to look at 5 different stories at the same time and understand that they are actually one story. The title of today's class is The 30-Day Window That Will Decide Who Controls the Next Century. And I know that sounds dramatic, but by the end of this, I think you will agree that if anything, it understates the situation. Let me tell you what I mean. Right now, between mid-April and mid-May 2026, there are 5 separate negotiations happening simultaneously. 5. A semiconductor trade framework between the United States and its allies. A currency settlement agreement between China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia. A technology standards vote at the International Telecommunication Union. A rare earth minerals pact being finalized across 3 African nations. And a military basing agreement in the South Pacific that almost no one in the Western press has mentioned. Separately, each of these is a significant policy event. Together, they represent the single most consequential 30 days in global power politics since the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. And I am going to explain to you exactly why, and I am going to tell you who wins and who loses. But first, let me show you why by walking through the structure, because if you do not see the structure, the prediction will not make any sense. So how do I approach a situation like this? The same way I always do in this class. I use what I call predictive history, which is a method built on 3 pillars. The first pillar is structure. What are the deep forces that constrain what is possible? Geography, demographics, economic dependencies, resource distribution. These things move slowly. They do not change because a politician gives a speech or a journalist writes an article. They are the rails on which everything else rides. The second pillar is incentives. In game theory, you never listen to what a player says, you watch what a player does, you ask, what does this actor actually gain or lose from each possible outcome? Because what people say they want and what they actually want are almost always different things. The third pillar is historical pattern recognition. History does not repeat, but as we have discussed many times, human institutions repeat. Empires repeat. The logic of declining powers and rising powers repeats. If you know the pattern, you can see the move before it happens. Now let me apply all 3 pillars to this 30-day window. Let us start with the players, and let me walk through each one carefully, because understanding the gap between what they say and what they actually want is the entire key to understanding what happens next. What does the United States say it wants? It says it wants a rules-based international order. It says it wants to protect democracy and free markets. It says it wants to prevent China from gaining an unfair technological advantage. It says these semiconductor restrictions are about national security. Okay, now what does the United States actually want? The United States wants to maintain what I call the trilogy of control. The dollar as the global reserve currency, American dominance in advanced technology, and military superiority that makes both of those things enforceable. That is it. Everything else is narrative. The semiconductor restrictions are not really about security. They are about ensuring that no country can build artificial intelligence systems that rival American ones, because whoever controls the most advanced AI by 2030 controls the economic productivity of the entire planet. The math on this is staggering. McKinsey estimated in 2024 that AI will add between $14 and $22 trillion to the global economy by 2030. The country that dominates AI does not just gain a trade advantage. It gains the ability to automate strategic decision-making in finance, logistics, military operations, and scientific research faster than any competitor can respond. That is not a trade issue. That is an empire issue. Now, what does China say it wants? It says it wants peaceful development. It says it wants mutual respect among nations. It says it wants a multipolar world where no single country dominates. What does China actually want? China wants to break the trilogy. Specifically, China wants 3 things. First, a currency settlement system that does not depend on the dollar, which is why Beijing has been building the cross-border interbank payment system since 2015 and is now processing over $400 billion annually, up from $50 billion just 3 years ago. Second, China wants semiconductor self-sufficiency, which is why it has invested over $150 billion in domestic chip fabrication since 2020 and has made genuine breakthroughs in 7-nanometer production using deep ultraviolet lithography, a technique that Western analysts said was impossible just 2 years ago. Third, China wants a network of resource and military agreements across the global south that gives it the same kind of structural leverage that the United States built through NATO and the Bretton Woods system after 1945. We will come back to that in a moment. What does India want? India says it wants strategic autonomy. What India actually wants is to be the swing vote. India is doing something very clever. It is positioning itself as the essential partner that both sides need, which allows it to extract concessions from everyone. India is buying discounted Russian oil and selling refined products to Europe. India is negotiating technology transfers from America while maintaining defense relationships with Moscow. India's game is balance, not alliance. And in this 30-day window, India's vote on the technology standards framework at the ITU may be the single most important decision any country makes. And then there is Saudi Arabia, and this is where it gets really interesting. Saudi Arabia says it wants to modernize, to diversify its economy, to build the future. What Saudi Arabia actually wants is to survive the end of oil without losing power. The kingdom understands, perhaps better than anyone, that the age of petroleum dominance is ending. Not next year, not even in 10 years, but structurally, permanently. And Saudi Arabia is now negotiating a currency settlement agreement that would allow it to accept Chinese yuan for oil sales. Let me explain why that matters. If Saudi Arabia begins settling even 20% of its oil sales in yuan instead of dollars, it creates a crack in the petrodollar system that cannot be repaired. Once one major oil producer breaks the dollar-only convention, others follow. This is not speculation. This is how monetary regime changes have worked throughout history. Okay, now I have the players and their real interests. Let me give you the structural facts because this is where the prediction gets built. And I want to go through these carefully. Structural fact number 1 of 4. The semiconductor choke point is narrower than you think. Right now, over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, anything below 7 nanometers, are manufactured in Taiwan by a single company. That company is TSMC. And TSMC's most advanced fabrication facility, Fab 18, sits 130 kilometers from the Chinese mainland. This is the most strategically vulnerable supply chain in human history. There is no close second. If that facility were disrupted for even 90 days, Apple, Nvidia, Qualcomm, AMD, every major American technology company would face production shutdowns. The economic damage would be measured in trillions. Now here is the part that should keep you up at night. The United States knows this, China knows this, and both of them are racing to reduce their dependence on that single facility. America is spending $52 billion through the CHIPS Act to build fabrication plants in Arizona and Ohio. But those plants will not reach full production capacity until 2028 at the earliest. China is pouring money into domestic alternatives, but its most advanced domestic chips are still roughly 2 generations behind TSMC. This means that between now and 2028, there is a window, a gap, in which neither side has a backup plan. Whoever secures preferential access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing during this window gains a structural advantage that compounds for decades. Structural fact number 2 of 4. The rare earth trap is closing. Here's something that almost nobody in the mainstream press has explained properly. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth mining and 90% of rare earth processing. Rare earths are essential for everything from electric vehicle batteries to missile guidance systems to wind turbines. In 2024, China began restricting exports of gallium, germanium, and antimony, 3 minerals essential for advanced chip manufacturing and defense applications. This was not a negotiating tactic. This was a structural move. And here is the historical parallel that matters. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo demonstrated that control over a critical resource could be weaponized to reshape global politics overnight. The OPEC nations discovered that they held leverage they had never fully used. China is in exactly that position with rare earths today, and the rare earth minerals pact being negotiated right now with the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, and Mozambique would give China even deeper control over the next generation of critical minerals, specifically cobalt and lithium. Structural fact number 3 of 4. The ITU vote is a Trojan horse. Most people have never heard of the International Telecommunication Union. It is the United Nations body that sets global technology standards. In May 2026, the ITU votes on a framework that will determine the technical standards for next-generation AI infrastructure, specifically the protocols governing how AI systems communicate across borders, how data is shared between countries, and what security architectures become the global default. This sounds technical and boring. It is neither. Whoever writes the technical standards controls the architecture. and whoever controls the architecture controls the market. Let me give you a historical example. In the 1990s, the United States pushed through a set of Internet Governance Standards, TCP/IP, and the DNS root server system that gave American companies structural advantages for 30 years. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they did not become dominant only because they were innovative. They became dominant because the underlying architecture of the internet was designed around American standards. China is now attempting to do the same thing with AI infrastructure, and if the ITU adopts Beijing's proposed framework, it creates a parallel technology ecosystem in which Chinese AI systems become the default across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Structural fact number 4 of 4. The South Pacific base changes the military calculus entirely. In late March 2026, China signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands that includes provisions for naval resupply and communications infrastructure. Almost no major Western outlet covered this with the seriousness it deserves. Let me tell you why this matters. The South Pacific is the connective tissue between Asia and the Americas. American military planners have always assumed that in a crisis over Taiwan, the Pacific would be an American lake. That assumption is no longer valid. A Chinese naval presence in the South Pacific means that American carrier groups moving toward Taiwan now have to account for threats on their flank. It extends Chinese early warning capabilities by thousands of kilometers, and it creates a political reality in which Pacific Island nations that have historically been ignored by Washington, suddenly become strategic prizes. So now I have the structure, I have the players. Let me give you the prediction. And I want to present this as a fork because this situation ends in one of two ways, and which way it goes depends on what happens in the next 30 days. Scenario 1. America consolidates. In this scenario, the United States successfully pressures its allies, Japan, the Netherlands, South Korea, to maintain strict semiconductor export controls. India votes with the Western Bloc at the ITU. The African rare earth negotiations stall because American diplomats offer a competing investment package. Saudi Arabia delays its yuan settlement agreement under heavy pressure from Washington. In this scenario, the American trilogy holds for another 5 to 8 years. China's AI development slows. The dollar remains dominant, and the current global order continues, bruised but intact. This is what Washington is working toward right now. Now, here is why I do not think this scenario is likely. It requires every single piece to hold. Every ally has to stay aligned. India has to choose sides, which India has spent 20 years